The ocean slept under a silver moon. Its surface was smooth as glass, rippling only when a faint breeze whispered through the air. Goo Lagoon, usually alive with laughter, volleyball games, and the smell of grilled kelp burgers, now rested in perfect stillness. The sand, once scattered with footprints, was untouched, and the waves crawled lazily onto shore before retreating again, sighing softly, like a creature half asleep. Far in the distance, the coral cliffs shimmered faintly, their jagged edges catching glimmers of moonlight. Above, jellyfish drifted in slow motion, their translucent bodies glowing like tiny lanterns in the dark. The world was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels almost alive, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. SpongeBob sat near a small campfire, poking it gently with a stick. The flames were tired orange and blue tongues flickering low, barely clinging to the driftwood beneath them. His face glowed softly in the firelight, his eyes half-lidded with the drowsy calm that only late nights by the sea could bring. Patrick sat beside him, a few shells scattered around his rock pillow. He stared blankly at the horizon, munching quietly on a bag of kelp chips. Every crunch sounded too loud in the silence, echoing faintly over the water. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled, the tide whispered, and the stars blinked softly overhead. Finally, SpongeBob broke the silence. "Hey, Patrick," he murmured, his voice gentle, almost careful not to disturb the peace. "Do you ever wonder why the ocean sounds like it's breathing?" Patrick blinked slowly, crumbs on his chin. "Maybe it's hungry," he said after a pause, "or sleepy, kind of like me." SpongeBob smiled faintly but didn't laugh. His gaze lingered on the horizon. "No, I mean, listen." He tilted his head slightly. The sound of waves seemed to deepen, like a slow inhale followed by a distant exhale. Between each pulse of water there was a soft hum, almost like a low voice buried in the tide. Patrick frowned. "I don't hear anything." "Shh," SpongeBob whispered, holding up a hand. "There it is again." The hum stretched faintly through the fog, vibrating like a low musical note, played far beneath the surface. It was steady, rhythmic, not wind, not current. Something else. Something deliberate. The two friends sat frozen, staring into the mist. And then, just for a moment, they saw it. A flicker of light. It cut through the fog like a thread of silver, there one second and gone the next. It wasn't lightning, and it wasn't the reflection of the moon. It was too clean, too straight. It almost looked like a beam. From a lighthouse. SpongeBob squinted. "Did you see that?" Patrick nodded slowly, his eyes wide. "Uh-huh. But that's weird, SpongeBob. Goo Lagoon doesn't have a lighthouse." SpongeBob didn't answer right away. The campfire crackled weakly beside him, throwing tiny sparks that died as they floated upward. His gaze drifted across the water, dark, endless, and softly breathing. The light appeared again, just a pulse this time, like an eye blinking open somewhere in the mist. Then came the sound, a long, low foghorn rolling across the waves. Both of them froze. The sound didn't belong. Goo Lagoon was miles from the nearest port. No ships, no harbor, no reason for a foghorn. Yet it echoed through the night, deep and haunting, making the surface of the lagoon shiver. Patrick swallowed. "Maybe someone's lost," he said softly. "Maybe they're calling for help." SpongeBob stood up slowly, brushing sand off his pants. "Or maybe—" He paused, watching the horizon where the light had been. "Someone's calling us." The fire flickered lower and the wood hissing as the moisture in it boiled away. SpongeBob stepped closer to the water's edge, where the waves kissed the sand and withdrew. His reflection shimmered and distorted two bright eyes, staring into a mirror made of liquid moonlight. He could feel something in the air now, a pull, faint but certain. The same feeling he got when jellyfishing in places he wasn't supposed to go, when the ocean seemed to whisper secrets he couldn't quite understand. Patrick stood beside him, holding his half-empty bag of chips like a talisman. "I don't like this," he muttered. "It's spooky." SpongeBob nodded, though his eyes still glowed with quiet curiosity. "Yeah," he said softly, "it is." The light flickered once more brighter this time, and then vanished completely into the mist. The foghorn's last note faded into silence. Only the sound of the sea remained. And beneath it, faint but real, came the whisper of something ancient, something that had been waiting for a very long time to be found. The campfire had died into soft embers now, faint orange dots, glowing weakly beneath the ash. SpongeBob and Patrick stood in silence, the sound of waves washing gently over their feet. The water was colder than it should have been, carrying with it the smell of deep ocean, that strange mix of salt, stone, and something older. Above them, the fog drifted low and heavy like the sky had come down to meet the sea. Every few seconds the mist seemed to breathe, expanding and tightening around them, swallowing the world beyond the beach. Patrick rubbed his arms. "Do you think we should, go check it out?" SpongeBob tilted his head, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I think so," he said softly. "It feels like it wants us to." Patrick blinked. "It?" SpongeBob hesitated and then nodded. "The light." They started walking along the shoreline, their footsteps soft and slow, leaving shallow prints that the waves quickly erased. The sound of the foghorn no longer echoed, but something else had replaced it. A hum, low, steady, just beneath hearing. The kind of sound that doesn't come from the air, but through it. The further they walked, the thicker the fog grew. It wrapped around their shapes like a blanket, muffling even their own breathing. Every so often, SpongeBob would catch glimpses of movement, something shifting just at the edge of his vision. Not a creature, not quite a shadow, but more like the ocean itself stirring in its sleep. Patrick stopped and squinted. "Hey, SpongeBob! Are you sure we're not just walking in circles? Everything looks the same." SpongeBob glanced back. Their campfire was gone. The beach behind them had disappeared into the mist. "I'm sure," he said, though his voice didn't sound as confident as he hoped. "Just keep walking. I can still feel the light ahead." Patrick frowned. "Feel it? You mean like inside your brain?" SpongeBob smiled faintly. "Something like that." They walked in silence for what felt like a long time. Time at night on the ocean always moves strangely too slow, too still. The only thing that seemed to change was the texture of the sand beneath their feet, growing cooler and smoother as they neared the waterline. Then faintly it appeared again. A beam of pale light broke through the fog, just for a second, a slice of brightness cutting across the water. Both of them stopped. The light swayed gently, like a pendulum, moving in slow arcs as though searching for something. Each time it swept across the lagoon, it made the fog around them shimmer like glass. Patrick took a step closer to the water, his reflection bending and stretching beneath him. "That's definitely a lighthouse," he whispered. "I've seen 'em in picture books." SpongeBob nodded slowly. His voice was quieter now. "Yeah, but how can it be here? Goo Lagoon doesn't even go that deep." Another wave came in, brushing over their toes, then retreating with a sound like a whisper. Beneath it, SpongeBob could swear he heard words, faint and broken. carried in the water itself. The keeper returns. He froze. Did you hear that? Patrick looked around nervously. Hear what? SpongeBob didn't answer. The words had already faded, but his heart was racing not from fear exactly, but from something else. A feeling again. A strange, unexplainable pull. The light flickered again, brighter now, closer. The fog began to glow faintly, revealing shapes of old wooden posts jutting out of the sand, half buried and covered in moss. Some still had fragments of rope tied around them. Patrick stumbled over one and fell onto his back. Ow! What's all this stuff? SpongeBob crouched beside a post, brushing off the sand. The wood was blackened and cracked. He ran his hand along the side until his fingers found something carved into it, a small, worn-out engraving of a spiral wave with a single dot at its center, a lighthouse symbol. He stared at it for a long moment, then turned toward the fog again. The light flashed closer now, close enough that he could see the faint shimmer of its reflection in the waves. Patrick's voice trembled. SpongeBob, I think it's getting closer. SpongeBob nodded slowly. His eyes stayed locked on the light. I know. The beam swept across them, washing their faces in a pale glow for just a heartbeat, then disappeared again. For that one moment, SpongeBob saw it clearly, a tall silhouette rising from the center of the lagoon. A tower, covered in coral and seaweed, with glass windows that shimmered faintly beneath the water's surface. Then darkness. Patrick grabbed SpongeBob's arm. Can we go home now? SpongeBob didn't answer. He was still staring at the place where the tower had been, trying to make sense of it, a lighthouse in the middle of a lagoon that had never had one. The fog began to thin just slightly, and the sound of the sea grew softer again. The hum faded, replaced by the gentle hiss of the tide. Patrick yawned. Maybe we dreamed it. SpongeBob looked at him and smiled faintly. Maybe. But sometimes dreams leave footprints. He pointed down at the sand where their prints had led directly into the waves, and not a single one had come back out. Morning didn't arrive suddenly. It crept into Goo Lagoon like a shy visitor, slow, pale, uncertain. The fog still hung heavy, but now the horizon carried a faint tint of lavender and gold, the color of seashells when the sun first touches them. SpongeBob blinked awake, his face half buried in sand. He didn't remember falling asleep. One moment he had been staring into the fog, and the next, darkness had wrapped around him like a tide pulling him under. He sat up slowly. The air was cool, carrying that gentle chill that comes just before sunrise. His clothes were damp, and the salt clinging to him like thin frost. For a brief, dizzy second, he wondered if he had dreamed it all, the light, the hum, the foghorn. Then he saw Patrick. His friend was lying on his back nearby, snoring softly, half covered in a thin layer of sand. His pink belly rose and fell rhythmically, and beside him sat the empty bag of kelp chips, now filled only with seashells the tide must have dropped off during the night. SpongeBob smiled faintly. Good morning, buddy. Patrick didn't move. SpongeBob stood up and brushed himself off, gazing toward the water. The fog was starting to lift now, revealing the long stretch of the lagoon, soft waves curling onto the beach, sunlight beginning to glint off the surface. It looked peaceful, normal, too normal. He turned around, scanning the shore for their campfire. The ashes were there, black and cold, surrounded by small round stones they had placed to keep it steady. Their footprints were still visible in the sand, leading toward the water's edge, but then they stopped. No return prints. SpongeBob frowned. We walked here, he whispered to himself, tracing the path with his eyes. But how did we come back? Something metallic caught his attention in the distance, half buried beneath a pile of wet sand and seaweed. The morning light glinted off it faintly. Curious, SpongeBob walked closer, his square shoes sinking slightly into the damp ground. As he brushed the sand away, the shape began to take form, a large, rusted metal plate, old and weathered, its edges corroded by salt. There were words engraved on it. SpongeBob squinted, leaning closer. Property of Goo Lagoon Lighthouse at Dinana. His breath caught. Patrick! Patrick, wake up! Patrick groaned, rubbing his eye. 5 more minutes. No, really, look at this. Patrick rolled over, blinking. What's it say? SpongeBob pointed at the letters. A lighthouse. Here. In Goo Lagoon. Patrick blinked a few times. Since when do lagoons have lighthouses? That's the thing. SpongeBob ran his fingers over the rusted surface. They don't? The metal groaned faintly as he moved it, and beneath it, he saw more fragments of old planks, a few shattered glass shards, even a bent piece of railing. All of it looked ancient, coated in barnacles and sand, as though it had been sleeping here for years. He crouched down, eyes thoughtful. Patrick, I think the lighthouse was real. Patrick tilted his head. The one we saw last night? Yeah, maybe it was buried or sunk or... He hesitated. Forgotten. Patrick scratched his head. How do you forget a big light tower? SpongeBob smiled faintly. Maybe it wanted to be forgotten. A gust of sea wind swept through, carrying with it a faint echo like the low sound of a foghorn, far away, muted by time. Patrick's eyes widened. Did you hear that? SpongeBob nodded slowly. Yeah, it's still out there. They both turned toward the water. The surface was calm, but every few seconds, small ripples formed circles spreading outward, vanishing into the distance. The sound came again, softer this time, like a sigh. Patrick hugged himself. I don't like sighing oceans. SpongeBob chuckled quietly, though the unease hadn't left his voice. Come on, let's see what else is down here. They started digging, using pieces of driftwood as makeshift shovels. The deeper they went, the more pieces they found: broken gears, corroded lanterns, an old compass that no longer pointed north. Each piece whispered of something that had once been grand. Then SpongeBob's hand brushed against something different, something smooth and cool. He wiped the sand away and found a circular brass plate, perfectly round and untarnished despite its age. In the center was the same spiral wave symbol he'd seen carved into the wooden post last night. A wave with a single dot in the middle. SpongeBob held it up, eyes wide. Patrick, this symbol, it's the same one we saw by the water. Patrick frowned. So the light was real? SpongeBob nodded slowly. I think so, and whatever this is, it's connected to it. The two of them sat quietly, staring at the plate as the tide began to creep closer. The morning light glimmered across its surface, reflecting faint, ghostly beams into the fog. For a moment, SpongeBob could almost see it again, the tall, glowing tower, the humming crystal at its top, the light sweeping over the sea like a heartbeat. He blinked, and the vision vanished. The foghorn echoed once more, faint, distant, and sad. Patrick looked nervous. Maybe we should go tell Mr. Krabs. He likes treasure. He'd know what to do. SpongeBob didn't answer right away. He was staring at the water again, where the light had shone the night before. It's not treasure, he said finally. It's a memory. The tide touched the edge of the metal plate, washing it clean as if the ocean itself agreed. And somewhere, far beneath the surface, a faint blue glow flickered just for an instant before fading into the deep. The sun climbed higher, but its warmth didn't seem to reach Goo Lagoon. Even under daylight, the air felt heavy, like the fog had left a ghost behind. The waves rolled gently, and with every retreat, SpongeBob noticed something strange. The sand shimmered faintly, tiny particles of blue light glinting between the grains. He knelt down, brushing his hand across the shore. The glow pulsed softly under his fingertips, like the heartbeat of something deep below. Patrick leaned closer, squinting. "It's sparkly," he whispered. "Do you think it's jellyfish dust?" SpongeBob smiled faintly. "No, Patrick. I think it's from it." He turned toward the water again. The lagoon's surface was rippling, not from wind, but from something underneath. The faint hum returned, the same low tone that had haunted the night before. Only now it sounded clearer, almost musical, like a note from an ancient song carried through the water. SpongeBob stood, brushing the sand off his hands. "Come on. I want to see where it's coming from." Patrick's eyes went wide. Wait, you mean in there?" "Yeah," SpongeBob said, already walking toward the shoreline. "We'll just take a quick peek." Patrick hesitated, looking at the water like it might bite him. "A peek always turns into a swim with you." SpongeBob laughed quietly. "Then let's make it a short swim." They waded into the lagoon. The water was colder than usual, crystal clear yet dark beneath, like looking into an endless window. As SpongeBob moved deeper, the glowing blue particles began to swirl around them, gathering into faint trails that drifted toward the center of the lagoon. Patrick shivered. "I don't like how it's moving. It's like it knows we're here." SpongeBob looked down, mesmerized. The light was responding to their motion, circling them in slow spirals. "Maybe it does." They floated farther out until the beach was just a soft line behind them. The hum deepened, not frightening but powerful, like the sound of the sea itself remembering its own name. Then the fog parted. What they saw made both of them fall silent. Beneath the surface, stretching from the lagoon's floor, rose a massive shape, a structure half covered in coral and glowing algae, its body made of stone and steel. The faint light rippled across it, revealing the unmistakable silhouette of a tower, a lighthouse. It was tilted slightly, one side broken and swallowed by the sand. The top was cracked open, but from its core still pulsed that blue light, soft, rhythmic, alive. Patrick's jaw dropped. "SpongeBob, it's real." SpongeBob nodded slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "The lighthouse of Goo Lagoon." They floated there, awestruck. The current around the tower moved differently, not chaotic, but purposeful, circling in slow, graceful patterns. The sound they'd been hearing all night came from here, resonating through the water like the deep hum of a conch shell pressed to an ear. SpongeBob swam closer, touching the tower's surface. The stone was cool and smooth, carved with faded spirals, the same symbol again and again. Waves, circles, eyes, warnings or prayers, he couldn't tell. As his hand rested against the wall, the blue glow beneath it brightened. Patrick backed up nervously. "SpongeBob, maybe don't touch glowing ancient sea towers?" But SpongeBob didn't move. He could feel something through the stone, not just vibration, but memory. Images flickered behind his eyes, a vast storm swirling above the sea, a lone figure standing atop the lighthouse, turning the beam toward the horizon. And then, the light fading into silence. The sun rose over Bikini Bottom with quiet reluctance. A soft, golden haze blanketed the horizon, turning the ocean into a shimmering field of light. Goo Lagoon looked peaceful again, as if nothing had happened. But the air still felt different, charged with a strange electricity that seemed to hum just beneath the surface. SpongeBob walked slowly along the shoreline, his footprints dark and wet against the pale sand. His square pants were still damp from the night before, but he didn't seem to mind. He was too busy looking down, scanning every ripple, every patch of sand, every glimmer that caught the sun. Patrick trudged beside him, dragging a stick behind him that left wobbly lines in the sand. "So remind me," he mumbled, still half asleep. "We're treasure hunting?" SpongeBob smiled faintly. "Sort of, but not for gold or anything. For clues." Patrick blinked slowly. "Oh, clues. Right. What's a clue look like again?" SpongeBob laughed softly, the sound light and calm in the morning air. "You'll know it when you see it." They walked in silence for a while, the tide brushing gently against their feet. The water glittered with faint blue sparkles that shimmered and faded like tiny fireflies. Every so often, SpongeBob would kneel down and pick up a fragment, a shard of metal, a piece of coral fused to something man-made. Each time his curiosity deepened. Finally, Patrick pointed ahead. "Hey, what's that shiny thing?" Half buried in a dune of wet sand was a flat, rusted shape. SpongeBob hurried over and brushed it off with his hands. Letters barely legible revealed themselves beneath the rust. "Property of Goo Lagoon Lighthouse. Do not enter." SpongeBob froze. For a moment, all sound seemed to fade: the waves, the wind, even the distant calls of seagulls. Patrick leaned closer. "Hey, we found a clue." SpongeBob nodded slowly, his eyes wide with quiet wonder. "Yeah," he whispered. "We did." He ran his hand along the rough surface, feeling the etched letters under his fingertips. It was real, tangible proof that what they saw last night wasn't just a dream. Patrick squinted at the horizon. "But if there's a sign, where's the lighthouse?" SpongeBob looked up. The morning fog still lingered over the lagoon, thick and pale, curling like smoke. For a long moment, there was nothing but that endless wall of white. Then, deep within it, something moved, a faint shape, impossibly tall and distant. A tower. The silhouette wavered through the mist, its upper half glowing faintly with a cool, bluish light. It was as if the morning sun couldn't touch it. Patrick's voice dropped to a whisper. "SpongeBob is back." SpongeBob didn't answer. He couldn't take his eyes off it. The sight made his chest tighten, part fear, part awe, part recognition. It was beautiful and sad all at once, like an old song finally remembered. The tower's light pulsed once, and the fog around it shimmered as if alive. The ocean responded, rippling outward in perfect circles. Jellyfish began to appear, drifting lazily across the lagoon, glowing faintly pink and blue. They moved toward the tower in gentle rhythm, like moths drawn to a flame. SpongeBob stepped forward, the surf washing around his ankles. "They're following it," he whispered, "like they remember it too." Patrick frowned. "Jellyfish have memories?" "Maybe not like ours," SpongeBob said softly, "but they feel things. The ocean remembers, even if we don't." The two friends stood there for a while, saying nothing. The tower's light continued to blink faintly, slow and steady, like a heartbeat coming from deep inside the fog. SpongeBob turned to Patrick. "We should get closer." Patrick's eyes went wide. "Closer?" "SpongeBob, it's glowing and humming and maybe haunted." SpongeBob's smile was calm, though his eyes were serious. "If it wanted to hurt us, it could have last night, but it didn't. It just showed us." Patrick hesitated, glancing at the sign in the sand. The words "Do not enter" stared back at him, half buried and broken. "Signs usually mean don't," he said nervously. "I know," SpongeBob replied. "But sometimes signs are left behind by people who were afraid of what they didn't understand. The fog drifted closer, wrapping around them like soft cloth. The sound of the waves grew deeper, resonant, echoing through the still morning air. Patrick sighed and dropped his stick. "Fine. But if we get cursed, you're telling Squidward." SpongeBob chuckled. "Deal." They began walking toward the water again, their reflections stretching across the glimmering sand. Each step felt heavier, the air thicker. The hum of the lighthouse grew louder, steady as a drumbeat, vibrating faintly through the ground beneath their feet. SpongeBob looked back once more at the beach, their campfire ashes, their footprints, the rusted sign half buried in sand. Everything familiar seemed to shrink behind them as the fog swallowed the shore. Night-eye. Ahead, the faint outline of the lighthouse glowed brighter, the sound of the ocean deepening into a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Patrick shivered. "SpongeBob, are you sure this is a good idea?" SpongeBob nodded, his expression calm but distant. "No," he said softly, "but I think it's the right one." And with that, they stepped forward into the mist, into the unknown, following the heartbeat of a forgotten light. The mist grew thicker with every step, wrapping the world in a pale, glowing blur. It muffled sound, softened light. Even the ocean itself seemed to hush as SpongeBob and Patrick made their way forward. Their silhouettes stretched faintly across the damp sand, distorted by the shifting haze. Somewhere behind them, the last traces of the morning sun flickered and vanished, swallowed by the fog. Patrick clung to SpongeBob's shoulder. "I can't even see my own nose." SpongeBob chuckled nervously. "That's because you're holding your breath, Patrick." Patrick exhaled loudly. "Oh, right." The sound of the surf faded until all that remained was a deep, low hum, steady and rhythmic, like a machine half asleep. The ground beneath them vibrated softly, as if the lagoon itself was alive. Then, through the fog, a shadow emerged, vast and unmoving. The closer they got, the clearer it became. A tall, stone structure rising out of the water, its base surrounded by coral and seaweed that had grown over it for decades. "The lighthouse," SpongeBob whispered. It was enormous, far taller than anything they had ever seen in Bikini Bottom. The tower leaned slightly, its surface cracked and covered in barnacles. Faded markings, perhaps, once letters or symbols, were etched across its lower walls, now nearly erased by time. At the very top, a faint light pulsed slowly in a circle, cutting through the fog with soft blue beams. It wasn't bright, but it felt alive. Patrick squinted. "It looks kind of sleepy." SpongeBob smiled faintly. "Yeah, like it's been dreaming for a long time." The two waded through the shallow water, and the sand cool beneath their feet. Around them, jellyfish floated in silent patterns, glowing faint pinks and blues that reflected on the water's surface. They hovered near the tower's base, drifting up toward the light like petals caught in a current. Patrick watched one float past his face. "They really like this place." "I think they remember it," SpongeBob said quietly. "Maybe they used to come here when it was still working." Patrick tilted his head. "You mean when it wasn't all broken and creepy?" "Yeah," SpongeBob said, placing a hand against the stone wall. "When it still guided ships. Or maybe something else." The texture of the wall was rough, cold, and damp. He could feel a soft vibration through it, not mechanical, but rhythmic, almost like a slow heartbeat. Patrick touched it too, then pulled his hand back quickly. "It's warm." SpongeBob frowned, pressing his palm flat again. He was right. The stone wasn't cold at all. It was faintly warm, like something deep inside was still alive, pulsing just beneath the surface. "That's not normal," Patrick muttered. SpongeBob didn't answer. He was staring upward, following the spiraling cracks that climbed the tower's side. Some of the fissures glowed faintly, a soft turquoise light leaking out like veins of energy. Patrick gulped. Maybe we should go home and, tell someone. Like, I don't know, Squidward? SpongeBob shook his head slowly. If it's been asleep this long, it deserves to be remembered, not left to fade away again. The water around them rippled suddenly. A current moved past their legs, gentle but deliberate, as if pushing them closer to the base of the lighthouse. Patrick stumbled. Hey! It's pulling me in. SpongeBob grabbed his arm and steadied him. The current faded just as quickly as it had come. The jellyfish hovered motionless again, their lights pulsing in time with the tower's glow. It's not trying to hurt us, SpongeBob said softly. It's inviting us. Patrick frowned. Inviting us to what? A haunted party? SpongeBob smiled faintly, his eyes distant. To remember. They circled the tower's base, searching for an entrance. Most of it was buried underwater, but after a few minutes, SpongeBob noticed a rusted door partially hidden beneath a thick curtain of seaweed. He brushed the growth aside, revealing an old handle, corroded but still intact. Around it, carved into the stone, were faint words barely visible through layers of algae. Keeper's quarters. SpongeBob reached for the handle. It was covered in barnacles, but when he pulled, the door creaked. Not locked, just heavy. A deep, hollow echo came from within. Patrick froze. SpongeBob? That's the kind of sound doors make in scary movies. SpongeBob took a slow breath. Maybe, but every story starts with someone opening a door. He looked back at Patrick, smiling gently. You don't have to come if you don't want to. Patrick hesitated, then sighed dramatically. Fine, but if I see even one ghost, I'm turning into a pancake and floating home. SpongeBob giggled and pushed the door open. Inside, the air was cold and damp. Dust and water particles floated like tiny stars in the narrow beam of light spilling from the doorway. The walls were lined with old machinery, gears half buried in coral, and levers rusted beyond recognition. The hum from outside grew stronger, resonating through the metal floor. It wasn't random, it was rhythmic, like a melody being played from deep within the tower. Patrick whispered, SpongeBob, I think it's singing. SpongeBob listened closely. It did sound like a song, slow, low, and hauntingly beautiful. The tones rose and fell softly, as if the tower itself was breathing. They stood there quietly, eyes wide, listening to the sound of something ancient stirring awake. Then SpongeBob said softly, It remembers we're here. Patrick blinked. How do you know? SpongeBob smiled faintly. Because the song changed. And it had. The hum deepened. The lights flickered faintly, and a faint glow began to seep from the cracks along the floor, forming faint trails that led deeper into the tower's heart. SpongeBob took one step forward. Come on, he whispered. Let's see where it leads. The deeper they went, the quieter everything became. The sound of the waves outside faded until it was only a soft memory, replaced by the slow, resonant hum echoing through the tower's metal bones. It was like stepping inside the heartbeat of a sleeping creature, slow, rhythmic, patient. SpongeBob led the way, holding a small jellyfish jar that glowed faintly, casting a soft blue light on the walls. The jellyfish inside floated calmly, its tendrils waving like ribbons in slow motion. Patrick followed closely behind, clutching a broken pipe like a bat. If anything spooky jumps out, he whispered, I'll politely ask it to stop. SpongeBob smiled, though his voice was hushed. "I don't think there's anything bad here, Patrick. Just forgotten things." The corridor curved gently downward, its floor slick with algae. The glowing cracks along the walls pulsed softly, leading them deeper like breadcrumbs made of light. Every few steps they passed something half-buried, a lantern, a rusted anchor, a shattered mirror. Objects that didn't belong underwater, yet here they were, preserved in silence. Patrick picked up a cracked compass. The needle spun wildly, never settling. "Doesn't work," he said, tossing it aside. "Maybe it's lost too," SpongeBob murmured. Finally, they reached a wide, circular chamber. The air was thicker here, filled with the faint scent of salt and rust. In the center stood a large, cylindrical structure, a glowing column of glass and coral fused together. Inside it, faint tendrils of light swirled slowly, like mist trapped in water. Patrick's jaw dropped. "Whoa! Is that a lava lamp?" SpongeBob stepped closer. "No," he whispered. "I think it's the heart of the lighthouse." The light within the column brightened slightly, responding to his voice. Faint patterns rippled across its surface waves, spirals, shapes that almost resembled memories. He placed his hand gently on the glass. "Hello?" The column pulsed. The light flickered once, twice, then the room trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling as a low, melodic hum filled the air. Patrick yelped. "Okay. It's awake, it's awake. Put it back to sleep." But SpongeBob didn't move. He watched as the glow intensified, forming images inside the column, blurred but recognizable. He saw the lighthouse as it once was, bright, new, shining over the lagoon. Sea creatures gathered near it, drawn to its warmth. Jellyfish, sea snails, even old boats floating peacefully under its beam. It had once been alive, loved, used. Then the images darkened. The waves grew rough. Storm clouds gathered. The beam flickered, and one by one the jellyfish scattered. The light dimmed until only darkness remained. SpongeBob whispered, "It remembers." Patrick peeked from behind him. "Remembers what?" "When it stopped shining." For a long moment the two stood in silence, the faint hum surrounding them like a heartbeat. The tower wasn't just a structure, it was a memory of something beautiful that had been forgotten by time and tide. Then the floor beneath them shifted. A section of coral-covered machinery flickered to life, gears turning sluggishly for the first time in years. Faint rays of turquoise light began to swirl up the column, spiraling toward the ceiling like rising smoke. Patrick panicked. "SpongeBob! You touched something! You turned on the thing!" SpongeBob watched in awe. "No, I think it was waiting for us." The light reached the top of the column and burst outward, illuminating the entire chamber. The walls, once dull and gray, now shimmered with faint carvings, shapes of waves, stars, and strange symbols. SpongeBob ran his fingers along one of the carvings. "These aren't decorations, they're coordinates." Patrick tilted his head. "Like for a treasure map?" "Maybe," SpongeBob said softly. Or maybe for where the light used to reach." The humming grew deeper, vibrating through the floor and their chests. The tower's outer walls groaned as though the entire structure was stretching after a long sleep. Dust cascaded down in shimmering streams. Patrick covered his ears. "It's getting louder." SpongeBob turned toward the spiral staircase that wound up along the inner wall. "Come on, we need to see what's at the top." Patrick groaned. "The top? Of that?" SpongeBob looked at him, smiling with quiet determination. "Every mystery deserves a view." Reluctantly, Patrick followed him. The steps creaked with every move, fragile but holding. Through cracks in the stone, They could see the soft glow of the ocean outside. The jellyfish still floated near the windows, their lights flickering gently like lanterns guiding them upward. Halfway up, Patrick whispered. You think anyone's been here since it broke? SpongeBob paused. No, I think it's been waiting alone all this time. Finally, they reached the top. The spiral opened into a wide glass chamber, the lantern room. The great lens that once magnified the lighthouse's beam was shattered, pieces lying in a perfect circle on the floor. But the light itself still lingered, a small, glowing orb hovering above the ruins, pulsing like a heartbeat. SpongeBob stepped closer. The orb flickered softly, reflecting in his eyes. It's beautiful, he breathed. Patrick stayed behind him, trembling. SpongeBob, what if it doesn't want us here? SpongeBob smiled faintly. Then it would have stopped us long ago. He reached out, and for a second the orb flickered brighter, almost recognizing him. Then it released a faint, harmonic tone, low, melodic, and full of memory. The glass shards on the floor began to vibrate, shifting back into place one by one, forming a circle beneath the light. The entire room filled with a soft, turquoise glow that spilled out the windows and into the fog. Outside, the jellyfish gathered in swarms, circling the tower. The waves shimmered. The ocean glowed. Patrick stared in disbelief. You fixed it. SpongeBob shook his head slowly. No, it fixed itself. It just needed someone to remember it existed. The beam shot outward, not blinding, not harsh, but gentle and steady, sweeping across Goo Lagoon like a dream returning home. Far below, the fog began to lift. The beach appeared again. Their old footprints glimmered faintly before fading away, as if the past itself was exhaling. The lighthouse hummed softly, its rhythm slow and peaceful. Patrick looked at SpongeBob. So, now what? SpongeBob watched the lights spin across the sea, his voice calm and full of quiet wonder. Now, he said, we see what it's trying to show us. The beam turned, sweeping toward the open ocean, and deep beneath the waves, something ancient flickered in response. The newly awakened light swept gently through the fog, tracing smooth arcs across the ocean. Inside, the hum of the tower had softened into something peaceful, almost like a lullaby. SpongeBob and Patrick stood near the top of the spiral staircase, their faces glowing faintly blue in the reflected light. The air was warmer now, vibrating with a quiet energy that seemed to breathe through the walls themselves. Patrick gazed up at the ceiling, eyes wide. It's like we're inside a giant jellyfish. SpongeBob chuckled softly. Yeah, only this one doesn't sting. I think it's happy we're here. The inner walls pulsed faintly, veins of turquoise light running through the coral-covered machinery. Pipes hummed gently, bubbles drifting through translucent tubes like glowing pearls. The old lighthouse didn't just look alive, it was alive in a way. SpongeBob reached out and touched one of the coral-covered panels. It thrummed beneath his fingers, warm and rhythmic. It's not electricity, he murmured. It's something deeper, like ocean energy. Patrick tilted his head. Ocean what now? Maybe it's powered by the tides, or memories, SpongeBob said dreamily. Whatever keeps the sea glowing at night. They climbed higher, the spiral staircase creaking softly beneath their steps. Faint rays of the outer beacon spilled in through cracked glass panels, painting the walls in shifting patterns of blue and gold. The higher they went, the more the air shimmered with faint motes of light, not dust, but tiny luminescent particles floating like stars inside the tower. Patrick reached out and caught one. It dissolved in his palm, leaving behind a faint tingle. They feel like bubbles, he whispered. SpongeBob smiled. Maybe they're old memories from when the light was still shining. They passed through a narrow corridor, its walls lined with strange machinery, dials, levers, and metal plates, inscribed with symbols SpongeBob couldn't recognize. The coral had woven through everything, turning the cold metal into something organic, almost graceful. At the end of the corridor stood a small wooden door, cracked but still standing. Faded letters were carved into its frame. Keeper's Study. SpongeBob pushed it open carefully. The hinges groaned, and the faint smell of salt and thyme drifted out. Inside, the room was small and dimly lit, a single window looking out toward the foggy sea. Everything was covered in dust and coral growth. A desk sat against one wall, its surface scattered with old papers, empty ink bottles, and seashells arranged in patterns. An old lantern lay tipped over, long since extinguished. Patrick wrinkled his nose. "Smells like Krabby Patties left out too long." SpongeBob smiled faintly. "This must have been where the lighthouse keeper worked." He began carefully sifting through the objects on the desk. Most of the papers had faded to blank, the ink washed away by time. But tucked inside one of the drawers, beneath a cluster of broken shells, SpongeBob found a small, waterlogged notebook. Its cover was cracked. The pages stuck together, but when he opened it, faint writing still remained. The first line was shaky but legible. "The light has dimmed again. The sea does not answer." SpongeBob's eyes softened. He must have written this before the lighthouse stopped working. Patrick leaned in, squinting at the faded words. "What's it say next?" SpongeBob turned the page slowly. "The jellyfish no longer gather near the shore. I fear the heart crystal is fading. Without it, the ocean will lose its glow, and Goo Lagoon will fall silent." They both grew quiet. Patrick whispered, "The heart crystal. And that's what's at the top, right?" SpongeBob nodded slowly. "It must have been what powered the light. But if it faded, maybe that's why everything forgot this place." He turned another page. The ink here was smeared as if written in a hurry. "The tide grows restless. The crystal hums in its sleep. I can hear it calling, but the others are afraid. They say the light is cursed. I know it only wants to be remembered." SpongeBob's voice trailed off. The last few lines were illegible, water-stained and torn. Patrick gulped. "So, what happened to him?" SpongeBob closed the diary gently. Maybe he vanished when the light finally went out, or maybe he became part of it. The air shifted. A faint breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of salt and old memories. Somewhere deeper in the tower, the hum changed pitch lower now, more resonant, as if acknowledging their discovery. Patrick looked nervous. "You think it knows we're reading its diary?" SpongeBob smiled softly. "I think it's just glad someone finally did." They left the study quietly, the soft glow from the crystal chamber above calling them onward. The staircase spiraled again, and with every step, the light grew brighter, a soft, radiant blue that filled the air with warmth and calm. At last, they reached the top chamber. The broken glass had repaired itself partially, and in the center stood the glowing crystal they'd seen earlier, larger now, shining with slow, pulsing waves of light. The hum surrounded them completely. It wasn't mechanical at all. It sounded almost alive, like a voice humming from within the ocean itself. Patrick whispered, "It's beautiful." SpongeBob nodded, stepping closer. The crystal's glow reflected in his wide eyes. "It's not just light. It's memory. Everything this place ever was, it's stored in there." He placed his hand gently on the base of the crystal. It was warm, and when he touched it, the glow rippled outward like a heartbeat. For a moment, SpongeBob could almost hear whispers, soft voices, echoes of laughter, the sound of waves crashing in rhythm. The lighthouse was remembering itself piece by piece. Patrick watched in awe. It's like it's showing you something. SpongeBob nodded slowly. I think it's showing us both. The light from the crystal brightened, flooding the chamber in soft blue and gold waves. It pulsed slowly, matching the rhythm of the ocean beyond the windows. SpongeBob stood still, hand on the crystal, eyes wide as images began to form within its depths. Faint outlines at first, then clearer with each heartbeat of light. Patrick leaned close. SpongeBob, I think it's playing a movie. SpongeBob didn't answer. He was mesmerized. Inside the crystal, they could see the past and the lighthouse standing tall and proud, its beacon shining strong over a calm, glimmering Goo Lagoon. The water sparkled with jellyfish and tiny schools of fish swirling around the base. Then the image shifted. A figure appeared inside the tower, tall, lean, wearing a long, old-fashioned coat. His face was mostly hidden beneath the brim of a wide hat, but his posture spoke of patience and solitude. The keeper, SpongeBob whispered. He watched as the man adjusted gears, turned dials, and checked glowing gauges. Each movement was careful and deliberate. The light responded to his touch, brightening with every twist and turn. The man seemed to hum softly a tune that echoed faintly through the crystal itself. Patrick tilted his head. He's singing to it. SpongeBob nodded. He kept it alive with his voice. The light must have needed harmony, not just power. The image grew darker. A storm began to brew. Waves crashed against the shore, thunder rumbling through the vision. The keeper rushed to secure the machinery, but something in the crystal flickered. The light pulsed erratically, then dimmed. SpongeBob's reflection glowed against the crystal surface. He could almost feel the panic of that moment, the keeper shouting silently as the beacon faltered. Patrick's voice trembled. What's happening? The light's dying, SpongeBob said softly. The heart crystal was losing its connection. The storm inside the vision raged on. The keeper knelt beside the crystal, pressing his hands against it, whispering something inaudible. The light flickered again, weaker each time, until finally a single flash illuminated his face. For the first time, they could see him clearly. His eyes were bright and kind, but tired, the look of someone who had stayed awake for too many nights watching over others. Then, with a final pulse, the light went out completely. The image shattered like glass. The glow from the crystal dimmed, returning to its slow, steady hum. The silence afterward felt heavy sacred. SpongeBob lowered his hand, eyes still fixed on the now quiet light. He didn't abandon it. He stayed until the end. Patrick scratched his head. So, he didn't run away? No, SpongeBob said softly. He became part of the light. That's why it still remembers him. That's why it woke up when we came. Patrick looked around nervously. You mean he's still here? SpongeBob turned to him with a small smile. In a way, yes. The lighthouse keeps the memory of its keeper. That's why it sings. Patrick frowned, trying to understand. So it's like when I hum in the shower and the bubbles hum back. SpongeBob chuckled quietly. Exactly like that, Patrick. The hum in the chamber deepened again, softer now, almost like a sigh of relief. The light seemed calmer content. The glowing veins along the walls pulsed in slow rhythm, casting rippling reflections on their faces. SpongeBob looked out the window. The view was breathtaking. The fog had thinned, revealing the shimmering ocean below. Goo Lagoon looked different now, bathed in the lighthouse's restored glow. The water sparkled as if waking from a long dream. Patrick pressed his face to the glass. Wow, everything's glowing. Even the jellyfish look happier. SpongeBob nodded, his voice warm. It's like the lagoon remembers the light, too. The two of them stood there for a long time, watching the beam slowly rotate across the horizon. It wasn't blinding or harsh, it was gentle, like a lullaby shining across the sea. Then SpongeBob noticed something odd. Along the edge of the crystal, faint new symbols were forming glowing runes that hadn't been there before. He leaned in, squinting. Patrick, these are the same markings from the diary. Patrick blinked. You mean the squiggly ones? Yeah, SpongeBob murmured. They're coordinates, but now they're glowing again. The crystal pulsed brighter, and for a brief moment the runes connected, forming a pattern that pointed downward toward the ocean floor beneath Goo Lagoon. Patrick gasped. Uh-oh, that means something's under us. SpongeBob's expression turned thoughtful but calm. No, it means something down there was connected to this lighthouse. Maybe, the source of its power. He placed his hand gently on the crystal again, and it responded not with light this time, but with sound. A low, melodic tone reverberated through the chamber, vibrating the air. It wasn't random, it was a call, reaching out across the sea. The sound echoed beyond the windows. The water outside shimmered in waves, and the jellyfish began to move, all of them drifting in the same direction, toward the open lagoon. Patrick pressed his face to the glass again. They're following the sound. SpongeBob's voice was barely above a whisper. They're answering it, after all this time. The glow from the lighthouse spread outward, illuminating the fog-covered horizon. It reached the beach, the dunes, the rocky edges of the lagoon, and then extended farther still into the deep water where the light couldn't reach before. Something responded in the distance, a faint glimmer, deep below the waves. It was too far to see clearly, but it pulsed once, slow and deliberate, in rhythm with the crystal's hum. Patrick stepped back. SpongeBob! Did the ocean just blink at us? SpongeBob smiled, his eyes shining in the blue glow. No, Patrick. Just woke up? The hum faded into silence, and for a long, peaceful moment, the only sound was the faint wind whistling through the broken glass. Patrick whispered, What now? SpongeBob looked toward the window, the light spinning slowly behind him. Now, we follow the memory to where it began. The stairs creaked under their feet as SpongeBob and Patrick made their way down from the glowing chamber. The hum of the crystal faded behind them, replaced by the faint rustle of the sea breeze slipping through cracks in the walls. The deeper they went, the more the air changed cooler, heavier, as if the whole tower was holding its breath. Patrick kept glancing upward. Do you think it'll stay on while we're gone? SpongeBob smiled faintly. It's been waiting for someone to remember it. Now that it has, I think it'll keep shining for a while. The staircase ended in a wide, round chamber they hadn't noticed before. The walls here were carved from coral stone and lined with faded photographs, ghostly, water-damaged images of old sailors, sea creatures, and the lighthouse standing tall through decades of change. A few of the pictures had faces scratched out by time, but one photo near the center was still clear, the keeper, standing proudly beside a young sponge, or maybe a distant ancestor of SpongeBob's, smiling at the camera. Patrick squinted at it. Hey, that guy kind of looks like you. SpongeBob tilted his head. Maybe he was someone who loved the sea like I do. He touched the photo gently. Or maybe the light just remembers faces it trusts. They turned toward the center of the room, where a hatch in the floor gleamed faintly. It was circular, sealed with coral-encrusted bolts, and on its surface was the same glowing rune pattern they'd seen on the crystal upstairs. Patrick gulped. Please tell me that's not a trapdoor to scary underwater things. SpongeBob crouched beside it, tracing the glowing lines with one finger. It's not scary, Patrick. It's a doorway to where the light began. He placed both hands on the hatch. As he pressed down, the runes lit up brighter, spreading like veins of blue fire. The sound of metal shifting echoed through the room, and with a soft click, the hatch unlocked. A rush of cool mist rose from below, carrying the scent of deep salt water and something older, something ancient. SpongeBob peered into the darkness. A spiral ladder led down into glowing water. The liquid shimmered like liquid moonlight, illuminating the edges of the shaft. Patrick's eyes went wide. SpongeBob? That water's glowing. Water's not supposed to glow. SpongeBob grinned. That's how you know it's special. Patrick sighed, resigned. I knew you were going to say that. They climbed down carefully, each rung damp and slippery from sea mist. As they descended, the sound of machinery faded completely, replaced by the gentle rhythm of waves lapping against stone. The ladder ended on a small platform submerged ankle-deep in the glowing water. It was breathtaking. The walls around them were made of crystal coral, reflecting the faint light like 1,000 tiny mirrors. Strange symbols were etched into the rock, pulsing softly in rhythm with their heartbeats. Patrick leaned over the edge, staring into the pool. I can see the bottom. It's all shiny. SpongeBob followed his gaze. The pool wasn't very deep, but at its center lay something extraordinary. A massive, gear-like structure, half buried in sand, covered in coral and glowing tendrils of light. This must have powered the lighthouse, SpongeBob whispered. But it's not metal. It's alive. As he stepped closer, the light around them grew stronger, responding to his presence. The tendrils began to move, curling toward SpongeBob's feet like gentle waves. Patrick took a step back. SpongeBob? The ground's trying to hug you. SpongeBob laughed softly. I think it's saying hello. He knelt beside the structure and placed his hand against its surface. It was warm, alive somehow. The moment his hand touched it, a deep vibration rippled through the water. The crystal above, far up in the tower, answered with a soft hum. The two sounds blended, one from above, one from below, creating a harmony that filled the chamber. It wasn't just noise, it was music, slow, ancient, and full of meaning. Patrick blinked as bubbles rose all around them. Whoa, it's singing back. SpongeBob's eyes filled with wonder. The lighthouse and the ocean were never separate. They were always part of the same heart. The light beneath the water pulsed one final time, brighter than before, and then steadied. The runes along the walls glowed in sequence like breathing. Then, as suddenly as it began, the vibration stopped. Silence filled the air again, but not the cold, empty kind. It was peaceful, fulfilled. SpongeBob slowly withdrew his hand. The glow remained steady now, the same tranquil blue as the ocean on a calm morning. Patrick smiled. So, we fixed it? SpongeBob nodded. We didn't fix it. We reminded it. He looked up toward the ceiling, where faint beams of light from the lighthouse's top shone down the spiral shaft. They flickered softly on the water's surface, completing the connection in the top and bottom of the beacon reunited. Patrick sighed in relief. Well, that's nice. No ghosts, no monsters, no exploding lights. I can live with that. SpongeBob chuckled. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't what's out there, Patrick. It's forgetting what used to shine. Patrick thought for a second, then nodded. That's deep, SpongeBob. Like really deep. Like deeper than my rock. SpongeBob smiled. Exactly, buddy. They climbed back up slowly, leaving the glowing chamber behind. The hatch closed with a soft hiss, sealing the connection once more. As they reached the top level again, the lighthouse beam turned, stronger now, steady, alive. Outside the window, dawn was breaking. The sky shifted from violet to gold, and Goo Lagoon shimmered beneath the renewed light. Patrick stretched, yawning. Can we go home now? I'm tired. SpongeBob looked out at the horizon, the beam sweeping across the sea one last time. Yeah, Patrick. We can go home. The light's awake again. The two friends walked down the beach as the morning sun rose, their reflections stretching long across the sand. Behind them, the lighthouse stood quietly, glowing faintly even under daylight, a guardian returned to its purpose. And far beneath the waves, the ancient mechanism continued to hum softly, a heartbeat of the sea, rekindled by memory and friendship. The morning after, the sky hung pale and glassy, its reflection turning Goo Lagoon into a perfect mirror. The world felt quieter than usual, not in the way of peace, but in the way of holding its breath. SpongeBob stood at the shoreline, the water gently lapping at his square toes. Patrick, half asleep and half buried in sand, snored softly beside him. The lighthouse still glowed faintly behind them, its beams softer now under daylight. Yet every so often, SpongeBob thought he saw something shimmer far below the surface of the lagoon, a slow, steady pulse of blue, deep and deliberate, like the heartbeat of the ocean itself. He couldn't stop thinking about what they'd found beneath the tower, the living mechanism, the way it had sung, back when touched. It wasn't just a machine, it had memory, feeling. It remembered the keeper. SpongeBob knelt at the edge of the water and whispered, "What were you guarding?" The waves gave no answer, only a faint ripple, as if something stirred far beneath. Patrick rolled over, yawning. "SpongeBob, are we still doing spooky light stuff, or can we go get breakfast?" SpongeBob smiled gently. "Soon, Patrick. But I think we need to finish what we started." Patrick blinked. "Finish? You mean like clean up?" "No," SpongeBob said, gazing into the lagoon. "I mean find out what the keeper left behind." The tide shifted, pulling at their feet. For a brief second, the water turned perfectly clear, and SpongeBob could see something below. A shape, large, half buried in the sand, metal, coral. He couldn't tell, but it was glowing faintly, the same color as the crystal from the lighthouse. Patrick saw it too and jumped. "It's looking at us." SpongeBob shook his head. "No, it's calling us." They grabbed their gear, a small raft, a flashlight, and Patrick's favorite snack bag for emergencies. As they paddled out, the air grew cooler. The lagoon, usually full of chatter and laughter, was silent now. Even the jellyfish floated quietly, forming a slow circle around them as if watching. When they reached the center, SpongeBob dropped anchor. The water below glowed faintly blue, swirling in patterns that seemed to form words. Patrick leaned over the edge, upside down. "That's either really pretty or really haunted." SpongeBob took a deep breath. Only one way to find out. He tied a rope around his waist, securing it to the raft. Patrick watched nervously as SpongeBob put on his diving goggles. "Wait," Patrick said. "What if something grabs you down there?" SpongeBob smiled. "Then you'll pull me back up." Patrick nodded bravely. "Okay. But if it's a sea monster, I'm pretending I didn't see it." With that, SpongeBob slipped into the glowing water. The surface rippled around him, and the light swallowed him whole. Instantly, the world changed. The deeper he went, the dimmer the world above became. The only light came from the glowing tendrils winding through the water, the same luminous veins he'd seen in the lighthouse's chamber. They twisted and pulsed, leading downward like a trail of stars. He followed them. The water was calm, heavy, dreamlike. Schools of jellyfish drifted past him silently, their bodies flickering with soft blue light. The deeper he swam, the more the world around him felt, like it had been sleeping for centuries, waiting for someone to arrive. Finally, he reached the bottom. The sand here shimmered faintly, and in its center stood a structure half coral, half metal, shaped like a great shell or heart. The glowing veins converged into it, humming softly. As SpongeBob approached, something stirred. The sand shifted. The coral heart began to open, petal by petal, revealing what lay inside. A sphere small, glassy, and filled with swirling light. Inside that light, faint images appeared, the same lighthouse, the same keeper. But this time, SpongeBob saw more. The keeper was writing in a logbook, his movements rushed. His voice echoed faintly through the water, distorted but clear enough to make out words. If anyone finds this, the light is not just a guide, it's a memory. The ocean remembers everything, every life, every voice, every sound that ever touched its waves. The vision shimmered. SpongeBob's eyes widened as the keeper continued. I was chosen to keep the light alive, not to warn ships, but to preserve what the sea could not. Memories fade on land, but here they never die. They sink. The light dimmed. SpongeBob reached toward the sphere, entranced. Memories of the ocean, he whispered. Suddenly, a current surged from below. The sphere pulsed once, twice, then released a soft, melodic tone. Around him, the sand began to rise, forming faint, ghost-like shapes, outlines of creatures long gone, flickering memories of sailors, jellyfish, and coral blooms. SpongeBob floated in the center of it all, surrounded by glowing echoes of the past. The lagoon was alive with memory. One of the shapes, the faint silhouette of the keeper, appeared in front of him. He stood tall, his hat gently drifting in the current, his face calm. His voice echoed directly into SpongeBob's mind. Thank you for waking the light. SpongeBob froze. You're the keeper? What remains of him, the voice replied softly. The light preserved me a memory, nothing more. But the sea needed someone to remember its song. You've done that. SpongeBob's chest tightened. But why me? Because, the keeper said, fading slightly, you listened to the sea, the same way I did. The glow brightened again, and then, as quickly as it had appeared, the vision began to fade. SpongeBob reached out, trying to hold on to it. Wait, what do I do now? The keeper's voice echoed one last time, soft as a whisper through waves. Remember it. That's all any light ever needs. Then everything went white. The water around SpongeBob shimmered like liquid glass, trembling from the energy that had just passed through it. The echoes of the keeper's words still vibrated faintly in his mind, as if the sea hadn't quite let them go. He blinked, disoriented. The glowing sphere had vanished, but its light remained a faint trail winding upward toward the surface. Slowly he began to swim, following the current that seemed to lift him rather than resist. Above him, the faint outline of the raft waited, the sunlight glimmering through the water like 1,000 shifting coins. Patrick's muffled voice echoed down. SpongeBob, you alive, buddy? You're not, like, part of the water now, right? SpongeBob couldn't help smiling, even through his awe. I'm coming up, Patrick. He broke through the surface with a gasp, the lagoon's air cool and still around him. Patrick immediately leaned over the edge of the raft, eyes wide and panicked. "There you are. I thought the water ate you." SpongeBob shook his head, climbing onto the raft. Droplets of blue light still clung to his skin, fading slowly into nothing. "It didn't eat me, Patrick. It showed me something." Patrick blinked. "Like a movie?" SpongeBob stared down into the glowing water. "Like a memory. The keeper was here, or what's left of him. He said the light wasn't just a beacon. It's a memory of the sea itself." Patrick tilted his head. "The sea has memory?" "Yeah," SpongeBob said softly. "Every sound, every wave, every laugh that's ever touched it. It remembers?" For a moment, the lagoon was silent. Then faintly, the water stirred and a low, almost melodic hum drifted from below, deep and resonant. It wasn't just sound. It was emotion. Patrick covered his ears. "It's humming again." SpongeBob listened, eyes wide. "No, it's singing." The hum grew stronger. Around them, the water rippled outward, glowing faintly with each pulse. The jellyfish returned, drifting in slow circles around the raft, their bodies pulsing in time with the sound. It wasn't frightening, it was beautiful, hypnotic, like the sea was trying to speak. Patrick squinted. "SpongeBob, why do I feel like the ocean is looking at us?" SpongeBob didn't answer at first. He could feel it. Something had changed. The lagoon wasn't just reacting, it was awakening. The keeper's memory had stirred something ancient beneath. The raft rocked gently. A breeze swept across the water, carrying a faint whisper, almost words, but not quite. SpongeBob leaned closer, trying to catch it. "Listen." He froze. Patrick's eyes went wide. "Did you hear that, or am I finally losing it?" SpongeBob swallowed. "I heard it." The light from the water dimmed, then flared again. A shadow passed beneath them, huge but graceful. It wasn't a creature exactly, more like the outline of something vast and flowing. Patrick yelped. "Something's down there." SpongeBob steadied the raft. "Don't move. It's not trying to hurt us." The shape drifted closer, circling the raft once before rising just enough for its surface to break the water, a massive, spiraling formation of coral and glass, glowing from within. It looked almost like a spine, stretching into the distance. Patrick whispered, "That's not a fish." SpongeBob nodded. "It's part of the lagoon. Maybe it's what the keeper called the heart of the sea." As they watched, small fragments broke away from the formation. Glowing shards that floated toward them like fireflies. SpongeBob reached out and caught one in his palm. It pulsed softly, warm to the touch, and for an instant he heard laughter, faint, distant, and familiar. A child's laughter. SpongeBob blinked. "That sound, I've heard it before." Patrick tilted his head. "Where?" SpongeBob thought back to the nights he and Patrick would play by the lagoon as kids, chasing jellyfish under the moonlight, hearing strange echoes on the wind. Back then he thought it was just the waves, but now he realized it had always been the lagoon's memory speaking to them. He looked up, eyes wide. "Patrick, this place has been calling to us for years. We just didn't know how to listen." Patrick stared blankly, then grinned. "So, we've been talking to water our whole lives?" SpongeBob laughed softly. "Maybe." The shard in his hand glowed brighter, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Then slowly it floated upward, dissolving into light. The water rippled again this time, forming small, circular waves around them. The voice returned, barely above a whisper now. The memory must rest." Patrick looked around frantically. "Who said that?" Was it me? Did I say that? SpongeBob's voice softened. It's him, the keeper. He's fading. The lagoon's glow began to dim. The jellyfish floated higher, their light fading too. The entire lagoon seemed to sigh, a deep exhale through the still air. SpongeBob placed his hand over the side of the raft. The water felt warm, alive. Rest then, he whispered. We'll remember for you. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The sun climbed higher, burning through the mist. The lighthouse stood tall in the distance, its light now still not gone, but calm. Patrick finally broke the silence. SpongeBob? Yeah? What if the light goes out again? SpongeBob looked at the reflection of the lighthouse across the water. Then we'll light it again. The raft drifted gently back toward shore, guided by a current that felt intentional, like the lagoon itself was carrying them home. As they neared the beach, SpongeBob turned back one last time. For a brief moment, he saw a silhouette standing at the water's edge of the lighthouse, tall, still, and peaceful. The keeper. He raised his hand in quiet farewell. Then, as the sun broke through the clouds, the silhouette vanished into light. By the time SpongeBob and Patrick reached Bikini Bottom, the day had turned golden. Sunbeams spilled through the water like ribbons, and the ocean floor glittered faintly with particles of light, the kind that normally faded after dawn, but now seemed to linger longer than usual. SpongeBob paddled their small raft all the way back to shore, his mind still adrift somewhere between awe and confusion. Patrick, however, had fallen asleep halfway through the journey, face pressed against a soggy snack bag. When they arrived near SpongeBob's pineapple house, he gently nudged Patrick awake. Patrick, we're home. Patrick mumbled something about ghost jellyfish and sleepy breakfast, then blinked awake. Oh, hey, we didn't die. That's a win. SpongeBob smiled softly, but didn't laugh this time. His thoughts were too full. The image of the keeper's silhouette, the glowing coral heart beneath the lagoon, and that whisper the memory must rest, kept echoing in his head. As they stepped off the raft, SpongeBob noticed something strange. Small flecks of blue light clung to his shoes. They shimmered faintly, like embers from the lighthouse had followed him home. He bent down, brushing his hand over the sand. The light spread beneath his fingertips, creating soft ripples that vanished seconds later. Patrick frowned. SpongeBob, is the ground supposed to glow now? SpongeBob looked up. No, but I think it's part of the light's memory. They walked through town together, and though everything looked the same, the Krusty Krab buzzing in the distance, jellyfish floating lazily overhead, there was a quiet strangeness in the air. The sea around them seemed alive in a new way, as if listening. When they passed Mrs. Puff's boating school, SpongeBob paused. The water shimmered near the dock faintly, like the light of Goo Lagoon. Patrick, he whispered, look. From beneath the dock, the reflection of a small lantern flickered, even though there was no lantern hanging above. It was only a shape made of light, bobbing softly in the water, just like the keeper's beacon. Patrick tilted his head. Okay, that's spooky. Nice spooky. But still spooky. SpongeBob crouched, staring at the reflection. The light pulsed once, and then, faintly, he heard it. Laughter. Not menacing or ghostly, but gentle, familiar, like the laughter of the townsfolk echoing through old memories. It vanished after a moment, replaced by silence. Patrick looked uneasy. Maybe the lagoon's memory is leaking? SpongeBob thought for a moment. No, Patrick. It's sharing. They continued toward the Krusty Krab. The familiar smell of sizzling Krabby Patties drifted through the current, and for a moment, SpongeBob felt comforted. Everything looked normal, Squidward, leaning on the counter with a frown. Mr. Krabs counting money in his office, customers chatting. But as SpongeBob stepped behind the grill, something caught his eye. There, inside the sizzling oil, tiny lights flickered between the bubbles, glowing blue dots that danced across the surface, forming faint shapes. A ship, a lighthouse, a face smiling through waves. SpongeBob blinked hard, then leaned closer. The images vanished as the bubbles popped. Okay, he whispered to himself. Either I'm seeing things, or the sea's trying to cook with me. Patrick, sitting at a nearby table, was oblivious. SpongeBob! I think my soda's glowing too. SpongeBob turned to look, and sure enough, Patrick's drink shimmered faintly, tiny blue lights swirling within the cup like drifting jellyfish. Even Squidward noticed. What is happening today? Why is my clarinet water glowing? Mr. Krabs poked his head out of his office. If it's making the food shine, maybe we can charge double. SpongeBob laughed nervously. No, Mr. Krabs. It's not for sale. It's the sea's memory. Squidward sighed dramatically. Wonderful. The ocean's having an identity crisis, just what we needed. But as SpongeBob looked around, he couldn't ignore it, the faint pulse in the walls, the rhythm in the floor, like the entire town was breathing in time with the sea. The glow was spreading, subtly, like light finding new corners to rest in. He whispered under his breath, "The light's alive." That night, when SpongeBob finally returned home, he found the glow had followed him even there. Small dots of blue light shimmered across his walls like fireflies, pulsing in slow rhythm. He sat on his bed, hands folded, staring at them. They seemed harmless calm, even comforting. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was unfolding. He thought back to what the keeper had said. The sea remembers everything. If that was true, then every laugh, every tear, every life beneath the waves still existed somewhere, woven into the ocean's song. Maybe that was what the light was doing now, restoring the memories the sea had forgotten. Patrick's voice echoed from outside, muffled through the pineapple walls. Hey, SpongeBob, if my rock starts glowing, do I call someone or just let it happen? SpongeBob chuckled softly. Just let it happen, Patrick. He turned off his lamp. The glow from the walls remained, faint but steady. Through his window, the ocean shimmered softly, a pulse that seemed to stretch from his home all the way back to Goo Lagoon. And for a moment, SpongeBob thought he saw it again, the silhouette of the keeper, far away by the lighthouse, watching over the waves. He whispered, "Thank you for the light." Outside, a single jellyfish drifted past, glowing faintly blue. It hovered near the window, pulsed once in response, then floated away into the night. The next morning arrived without warning, not with sunlight, but with a dim, silver haze that coated Bikini Bottom in stillness. The ocean felt different. Usually dawn here was a chorus, bubbles rising, seahorses galloping past the coral roads, the chatter of early fish folk heading to work. But today the sounds were muffled. Even the waves that touched the edges of town seemed to move slower, heavier, as if weighed down by invisible thoughts. SpongeBob stood at his window, watching the glow that once shimmered in the water begin to dull. The blue light that had danced across the streets was fading, replaced by a grayish hue, not gone, just tired. He pressed his hand to the glass. The reflection that met him looked strange. Faint ripples of light moved across his face, but his eyes looked distant, thoughtful. "Patrick," he whispered, "I think the sea's fallen asleep." Moments later, a loud thud echoed outside. Patrick had stumbled out of his rock home wearing a snorkel and pajamas, holding an umbrella upside down. "SpongeBob, My roof's leaking glow juice again. SpongeBob blinked. Glow juice? Patrick tilted the umbrella. A single droplet of blue liquid fell from its edge and landed in the sand. The drop flickered, then vanished. I think it's running out, SpongeBob murmured. Patrick frowned. Running out of what? SpongeBob hesitated. Memory? By mid-morning, the sky had darkened. Thin streams of rain fell, not ordinary rain, but soft, glowing droplets that hissed slightly when they hit the sand. They looked like tears from the sea itself, as though the ocean were trying to remember something it had already forgotten. Jellyfish hovered quietly above the lagoon, their once brilliant glow now dim and uneven. The lighthouse at Goo Lagoon flickered faintly in the distance, a single heartbeat of light, pulsing slower, weaker. SpongeBob and Patrick decided to return there. They walked along the shore in silence. The same sand that once sparkled under moonlight now felt colder, heavier beneath their feet. The fog that curled across the water had grown thicker, wrapping the world in a kind of gentle sadness. Patrick finally spoke. SpongeBob, do you think maybe the light just got tired of shining? SpongeBob shook his head slowly. No, Patrick. I think it's trying to rest. As they neared the old lighthouse, the waves grew quieter. The air was filled with a deep, resonant hum, the same tone they'd heard before, but now slower, fading. The sound felt like the ocean breathing its last dream. Inside, the spiral staircase glistened with moisture. Each step echoed softly as they climbed, the walls glowing dimly from veins of coral that once burned bright blue. Now they pulsed faintly, as if whispering farewell. When they reached the top, the great crystal that powered the beacon stood before them. Its light, once blinding and beautiful, now flickered weakly, cracks running across its surface like lightning frozen in glass. SpongeBob approached carefully. Hey there, he whispered, as if speaking to an old friend. You've been shining a long time, haven't you? The crystal pulsed once in response, a faint shimmer that filled the room with a soft hum. Patrick looked uneasy. Is it dying? SpongeBob didn't answer immediately. He placed his hand gently on the side of the crystal. The light warmed his palm for a moment, then faded again. No, he said quietly. It's remembering. Outside, thunder rumbled in the far distance, deep and low, like a memory rolling back through time. SpongeBob turned to the broken diary lying nearby, its pages fluttering slightly from the wind seeping through the cracks. He picked it up, flipping to a page he hadn't noticed before. The ink was faded, but still legible. When the light grows dim, it is not the end. It is the sea returning to silence, to listen once more. Every glow, every echo, it all finds its way home. Patrick tilted his head. So, the light's going home? SpongeBob smiled faintly. Yeah, Patrick. Maybe it's just time for it to rest, like how the tide always goes out before it comes back. The sound of rain grew louder, tapping gently against the lighthouse glass. For a moment, everything, the storm, the hum, the ocean itself seemed to breathe in unison. Tokyo, the keeper's silhouette appeared faintly in the reflection of the glass once more, hands resting on the railing of light. His form shimmered, almost transparent, like a memory in motion. SpongeBob didn't flinch this time. He simply smiled. You kept the light safe, he whispered. We'll do the same. The silhouette nodded a quiet, graceful motion before fading into the fog. The crystal pulsed one last time, brighter than ever, filling the tower with warm blue radiance that spilled into the rain, across the waves, through the lagoon, and over the town. Then slowly, gently, it dimmed. Darkness followed, not empty, not cold, but peaceful. The storm drifted across Bikini Bottom through the rest of the day, though it never became violent. It was the kind of rain that whispered rather than roared, a soft, shimmering drizzle that fell in quiet sheets, wrapping the town in calm. The familiar glow that once shimmered beneath every ripple of water had dimmed to faint dust. The sea felt slower now, older. Every building, every coral spire seemed to exhale like even the ocean needed rest. SpongeBob stood outside the Krusty Krab, mop in hand, staring out into the silvery horizon. The rain made small ripples on the ground, each one catching a faint trace of blue light before fading away. The glow was leaving. Patrick sat on a bench under a dripping umbrella that had seen better days. SpongeBob, feels kind of empty without the glow, huh? SpongeBob nodded. Yeah, but maybe that's okay. Patrick blinked. Okay? But it was so pretty. SpongeBob smiled faintly. It was. But sometimes even pretty things have to rest, Patrick. The light's not gone, it's just sleeping somewhere else. He looked back toward the lagoon, where the faint outline of the lighthouse was still barely visible through the fog. You know, maybe that's what the keeper meant when he said the sea remembers. Maybe it doesn't need to shine all the time to hold a memory. Patrick's umbrella sagged in the rain. So, we're like in a sleepy sea now? SpongeBob giggled. Yeah, a sleepy sea. That evening, SpongeBob walked home through the quiet streets. The water had grown darker, the kind of dark that wasn't frightening, just deep and heavy. A few jellyfish floated by, no longer glowing, their translucent forms blending into the gentle shadows. He thought about how fast everything had changed one night. The sea was alive with light. The next, it was like a dream slipping away. At his doorstep, he stopped. His pineapple windows reflected faint traces of blue that weren't really there, maybe echoes of what used to be. He opened the door, stepping into the silence of home. Inside, everything was exactly as it had been before the light came. The walls no longer shimmered. The bubbles in his aquarium had stopped glowing, and even Gary's shell looked a little less bright. Gary meowed softly, curling up beside him. SpongeBob smiled, rubbing his pet's head gently. It's okay, Gare Bear. Sometimes things fade so we can see what's left behind. He sat by the window, looking out at the dim ocean. The last flicker of the lighthouse pulsed far in the distance, one final heartbeat of blue, faint as a memory. And then it went dark. At that same moment, across town, something subtle began to happen. The water, the very current that flowed through every street, shimmered with faint silver dust. Not the bright, magical glow of before, but something quieter. It was as though the light had broken apart and settled everywhere in the sand, in the bubbles, in the laughter that lingered faintly through the silence. Mrs. Puff noticed it while locking up her boating school, the way the water rippled faintly under her flipper, soft as a sigh. Squidward noticed it too when he played his clarinet. The sound echoed farther, deeper, as if the sea itself was listening again. Even Mr. Krabs paused while counting his money, blinking at the faint shimmer running through his coins like the ocean's heartbeat had etched itself into everything that remained. The light hadn't died. It had changed form, woven into the memory of the sea itself. Late that night, SpongeBob returned to Goo Lagoon one last time. The rain had stopped. The sand was still wet and gleaming faintly under the distant stars. The lighthouse stood silent. No hum, no light. Only the sound of the waves breathing against the shore. Patrick was already there, lying on the sand, staring up at the dark tower. "Hey, SpongeBob," he said softly. "Do you think the light misses us too?" SpongeBob smiled, lying down beside him. "Maybe it does, but maybe it's still here, just not in the way we can see." Patrick thought about that for a long while, then whispered, "That's kind of nice." They both watched the ocean, calm and still. For the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full, like the world was holding its breath after a long story had ended. SpongeBob closed his eyes. He could still feel it, the faint pulse beneath the sand, the rhythm of the tide, the memory of that glow that once guided them through the fog. He whispered almost to himself. The light didn't fade. It just learned how to rest. A soft breeze passed over the lagoon, carrying the scent of salt and faint coral. Somewhere far below, deep within the sea, a single blue spark shimmered one last time, a promise that the light still lived, even in the quiet. The following night unfolded like a quiet dream. The storm had long since passed, but a cool mist lingered over Bikini Bottom. Every sound from the hum of distant currents to the faint creak of coral homes felt softened, slowed down, wrapped in memory. SpongeBob sat by his window again, his eyes half-lidded with wonder and melancholy. The darkness outside wasn't the kind that scared him when he was little. It was gentle, endless, almost like a lullaby. Oh, he had spent the entire day thinking about the keeper, about that faint figure who had once guarded the light. What had it meant to tend to something so fragile, to carry it across years until even the sea forgot his name? He thought about the crystal's heartbeat, how it had dimmed but never truly stopped. How the light didn't die, it simply became smaller, quieter, and scattered into everything. Maybe, SpongeBob thought, that's what remembering really means. A soft sound broke the silence, a low hum, so faint he almost didn't notice it. It came from outside. He stepped out of his pineapple house, and the water around him seemed to shimmer faintly again, not blue this time, more silver, like moonlight seen through tears. Each ripple pulsed in rhythm with that hum. Patrick stood nearby, rubbing his eyes. "SpongeBob, you hear that too?" "Yeah," SpongeBob whispered. "It's the same sound from the lighthouse." They followed the sound across the sand. The tide was low, revealing smooth, pale stones, scattered like pearls along the beach. Between them, tiny blue dots flickered faintly, not bright enough to illuminate, but enough to guide their steps. The hum grew louder as they neared Goo Lagoon once more. The lighthouse loomed in the distance, still dark, but the air around it shimmered softly, as if the sea itself was remembering how to glow. Patrick whispered, "Maybe the light's saying goodbye." SpongeBob looked at him, eyes wide but calm. "Or maybe it's saying, thank you." They walked until they reached the base of the lighthouse, where the waves gently lapped at their feet. The sound here was different, deeper, layered, like the voices of countless memories blending together in harmony. SpongeBob placed his hand on the cold, barnacle-covered wall. The hum vibrated through his fingers. For a moment, he could feel something, a pulse, not alive but not gone either, a presence that felt ancient and kind. The sea spoke not in words but in feeling. It was the memory of laughter echoing through summer tides, of jellyfish drifting in golden light, of old sailors and forgotten keepers and children chasing bubbles along the reef, of everything that had ever lived and loved beneath the water. The ocean was remembering itself. Patrick looked around, eyes soft with awe. "SpongeBob, it's like the whole sea's dreaming." SpongeBob smiled, tears forming but not falling. "Yeah, I think it is." He felt something warm against his palm. When he looked down, the faintest light glowed where his hand touched the lighthouse, small tendrils of blue curling outward, slow and graceful, like the final breath of a candle before it goes dark. And then he saw it again, the keeper's silhouette, faint but visible within the glow. This time the figure was closer, clearer. The old diving suit shimmered softly, seaweed flowing from its shoulders like a cloak. The faceplate glowed with soft white light. SpongeBob didn't move. He only whispered, "Hello again." The keeper tilted his head. No voice came, but the hum deepened, echoing through the water. The words weren't heard, they were felt. "The light is never lost, only passed on." SpongeBob's breath caught. Patrick looked from SpongeBob to the figure, wide-eyed. "Passed on? Like a torch?" The keeper's form flickered light, pulsing brighter, then dimming again. Slowly the glow spread outward, touching the sand, the water, the shells scattered near the shore. Everything began to shimmer faintly once more. SpongeBob's voice trembled. "So the light wasn't just meant to shine, it was meant to stay inside the sea, inside us." The hum responded softly, like a nod. The keeper's light grew faint, fragmenting into thousands of drifting sparks that floated upward through the water, tiny blue stars rising toward the surface, disappearing into the dark. SpongeBob reached out, his hand brushing one of the lights. It lingered against his palm for a moment before sinking gently into his skin, leaving behind a faint glow. Patrick gasped, "SpongeBob, you're glowing again." He looked down. The faint light pulsed from his chest, quiet, steady, warm. SpongeBob smiled, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not mine, Patrick. It's the sea's." The hum faded. The lighthouse stood silent once more. But this time, there was no sadness in its stillness, only peace. Patrick yawned and flopped onto the sand. "I like the light, but I like this quiet, too." SpongeBob nodded, sitting beside him. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, silver and calm. Somewhere deep below, the last of the glowing coral dimmed, completing its long, gentle rest. SpongeBob whispered to the sea, "Thank you for showing us." For a long moment, the waves didn't move, and then one gentle splash, like a nod. By the time dawn arrived, the ocean had grown quiet again, not in sorrow, but in peace. The storm had passed, the hum had faded, and the last ripples of light were now woven to the still waters of Goo Lagoon. The horizon shimmered faintly, kissed with gold. Sunbeams broke through the thinning fog, scattering across the gentle tide. The lighthouse, once so mysterious and alive with power, now stood silent and calm, a monument to everything that had come and gone. SpongeBob and Patrick sat on the damp sand, still watching. Neither spoke for a long time. The world seemed to be holding its breath, letting the sea exhale one final dream. Patrick's eyes were heavy but thoughtful. "SpongeBob, do you think the light's really gone?" SpongeBob smiled faintly, his eyes reflecting the sunrise. "No, Patrick. I think it's just everywhere now." Patrick frowned. "Everywhere?" "Yeah," SpongeBob said softly, gesturing to the waves. "In the water, in the air, in the way the sea moves when it breathes. Maybe even in us." He pressed a hand to his chest, where that faint glow still lingered deep beneath his skin, not visible anymore, but felt. A pulse that wasn't just his heartbeat. Patrick mimicked him. "I think I feel it too. Or maybe that's just gas." SpongeBob laughed, the sound echoing gently over the waves. "Probably both." The sea was returning to normal, or perhaps something new that felt like normal. Jellyfish floated once more across the sky, no longer glowing, but graceful and unhurried. The coral reefs glittered with dew-like pearls of light remnants of the glow that had soaked into everything. At the edge of the lagoon, the sand was etched with faint patterns. Spirals and waves glowed softly, almost invisible unless the sunlight caught them just right. The sea had written its own goodbye in the sand. SpongeBob ran his hand across one of the spirals. It shimmered beneath his fingers, glowing faintly for a moment before fading back into the sand. "It's funny," he whispered. "We thought we were discovering something new, but maybe it was just the ocean remembering what it used to be." Patrick tilted his head. "Do oceans forget?" SpongeBob smiled. "Sometimes. But they always find a way to remember again." As they sat there, the sound of the waves changed. The rhythm, that slow, pulsing hum, was gone, replaced by something gentler, a quiet melody of bubbles rising through the water, seagrass swaying in the current, the natural song of the sea returning. A jellyfish drifted near SpongeBob, hovering above his shoulder for a moment. Its body caught the sunlight, scattering it into soft blue and gold hues. It pulsed once, just once, and SpongeBob could have sworn he heard a faint echo of the keeper's voice in that motion. "The light is never lost." SpongeBob smiled. "I know." Patrick blinked at the jellyfish. "Did it just talk?" "Not with a word," SpongeBob said. "With feeling." Patrick nodded sagely. "Cool. I should start doing that." SpongeBob chuckled, then grew quiet again. His gaze turned toward the lighthouse, a tower that once seemed lonely, but now simply stood proud and calm, like it had found its rest. He whispered, almost to himself, "Goodbye, old keeper." The sea responded with a gentle wave brushing against his feet, retreating slowly as if bowing before the new morning. Hours passed. The day unfolded softly across Bikini Bottom. Squidward played his clarinet outside, and though he didn't notice, the notes carried farther than usual, floating through the sea like a lullaby. Mr. Krabs stood by the Krusty Krab's door, squinting toward the lagoon. "Strangest week of my life," he muttered, then smiled faintly. But maybe that light wasn't bad luck after all. Even Sandy from her tree dome looked out at the fading shimmer of the waves and whispered, "Nature sure knows how to tell a story." Everywhere the town moved slower, softer, as if some quiet understanding had settled into the current. That evening, SpongeBob climbed to the top of his pineapple home. He liked to sit there sometimes when he couldn't sleep, but tonight it wasn't about sleep. It was about listening. The sea stretched endlessly beneath him, glowing faintly under the moonlight. There was no beacon, no storm, no strange hum, just the rhythm of the waves and the feeling that something vast and kind was still there, unseen but present. He spoke softly into the breeze. Thank you, light, for guiding us home." The wind rippled through the surface of the ocean in reply, gentle, slow, like a final nod. SpongeBob lay back, hands behind his head, staring up at the surface where the moon shimmered faintly. Patrick's voice called from below, muffled. "Hey, SpongeBob, if the light ever comes back, can we have a glow party?" SpongeBob grinned. "Sure thing, buddy." "Good," Patrick yawned. "But even if it doesn't, this feels nice." "Yeah," SpongeBob whispered, his eyes closing as the ocean's quiet song lulled him to peace. "It really does." Far out at sea, beyond the reach of Goo Lagoon, the old lighthouse stood against the horizon, weathered, silent, but not forgotten. For just a heartbeat, its lantern flickered once, casting a soft blue glow across the waves. And then, like an exhale, it faded again. Not gone, just resting. Morning came softly, not as a burst of light, but as a whisper. The water that flowed above Bikini Bottom shimmered faintly with golden hues, the color of a new day breaking through the depths. The waves were calm, almost weightless. Every ripple seemed to move with purpose, like the ocean had finally remembered its rhythm. For the first time in days, the world felt awake. SpongeBob stirred in his bed, sunlight drifting through the window in soft bands that rippled across the floor. Gary purred quietly, still curled in his shell, his slow breathing keeping time with the faint pulse of the sea outside. SpongeBob sat up and rubbed his eyes. Something felt lighter. The heaviness that had lingered since the light faded was gone, replaced by calm. He stepped outside his pineapple home and blinked at the sight before him. Bikini Bottom looked the same, but it felt different. The sand sparkled faintly where the morning light hit it, like the ocean had left behind tiny flecks of its dream. Coral reefs glowed gently beneath the surface, not with the mysterious blue of the lighthouse, but with a soft, natural warmth, pinks, golds, and greens twinkling together. It was as though the world had taken a deep breath and exhaled peace. Patrick came stumbling out of his rock, still wearing his pajamas, and holding a breakfast bowl full of sand. "Morning, SpongeBob," he said cheerfully. "I made cereal, I think." SpongeBob laughed, the sound light and musical. "Morning, Patrick. You feel that?" Patrick paused, squinting. Breakfast crunchiness?" "No," SpongeBob said, smiling. "The sea, it feels happy again." Patrick tilted his head. "Huh. I thought that was just me." They both looked toward Goo Lagoon. The horizon shimmered faintly, the faint outline of the old lighthouse visible against the rising sun. The tower no longer glowed, but its reflection in the water caught the golden light perfectly, as if it was still shining in its own quiet way. Patrick's voice grew soft. "It's pretty without the glow, too." SpongeBob nodded. "Yeah, I think that's the point." As they made their way toward town, they noticed little things. Mrs. Puff's boating school had a new sparkle to its dock, the sunlight catching on wet planks that gleamed faintly like rippling glass. The crusty crab windows were wide open, letting in warm air and sea breeze, and even Squidward's clarinet notes sounded a little less grumpy. Bubbles floated lazily through the streets, their surfaces reflecting faint swirls of blue and gold like tiny living memories drifting by. Everything looked the same, but it felt healed. SpongeBob and Patrick passed by a group of jellyfish near jellyfish fields. The creatures floated gently in the current, their translucent bodies glowing in pastel hues, soft blues and violets mixed with sunrise orange. "They're back," SpongeBob said, clapping his hands. "The jellyfish are glowing again," Patrick gasped. "Whoa, did they recharge?" SpongeBob laughed. "Maybe the light didn't just fade, Patrick. Maybe it became part of everything, even them." One jellyfish drifted closer, its tendrils curling softly around SpongeBob's arm. He felt a faint pulse, warm, alive, kind, the same feeling he'd felt at the lighthouse when the keeper's light had passed through him. Patrick leaned closer. "Do you think it remembers us?" SpongeBob smiled. "I think it remembers everything." The two friends sat together in the sand, watching the jellyfish dance through the golden tide. The ocean shimmered quietly around them, no longer filled with mystery or fear, but with a kind of calm wisdom. Patrick stretched his arms behind his head, sighing happily. "You know, SpongeBob, even if the light's gone, it left behind something really nice." "What's that, Patrick?" "This feeling. Like the sea's still dreaming, but it's letting us dream, too." SpongeBob looked out toward the distant lighthouse, its shadow framed by the morning glow. "Yeah," he said softly. "Maybe that's the keeper's last gift." Patrick smiled sleepily. "You think he's still out there?" SpongeBob's eyes softened. "Maybe, but I don't think he needs to guard the light anymore. I think it's safe now." Because it's part of all of us. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of waves gently brushing the shore, birds calling in the far distance. Every sound felt alive, part of a melody that had always been there, waiting to be heard. And for a brief moment, SpongeBob thought he saw it again, just a flicker, deep within the reflection of the waves. A faint figure standing by the lighthouse railing, watching the sunrise. The keeper. Only this time the figure turned not to the sea, but toward Bikini Bottom. And then it vanished into the light. The day continued to rise slow and golden, the kind of morning that made Bikini Bottom feel almost weightless. SpongeBob and Patrick wandered toward the Krusty Krab, still quiet at this early hour. The sign creaked gently in the current, swaying with the rhythm of the sea. The doors were unlocked, and the faint scent of salt, grease, and seaweed hung in the air home. SpongeBob smiled and adjusted his work hat, even though the restaurant hadn't yet opened. "Feels like a good day to start early," he said brightly. Patrick looked around, half asleep. "It's always a good day when I don't explode the grill." SpongeBob chuckled. "Let's keep it that way, partner." Inside, the Krusty Krab looked almost magical in the morning light. Sunbeams filtered through the windows, landing on the tables like golden pathways. The floorboards glimmered faintly with sea reflections. Even the ketchup bottles looked brighter, standing in tidy rows like tiny red lighthouses. SpongeBob began wiping down the counter, humming softly. Not a song from any radio or movie, but something wordless, slow and kind. It echoed faintly, like the melody of the waves themselves. The sound filled the quiet restaurant until even the old fryer seemed to hum along. The door creaked open. Mr. Krabs stepped inside, his eyes half shut, muttering about early customers and unpaid overtime. But when he saw SpongeBob smiling behind the counter, something softened in his expression. "Eh? Boy-oh, you're here before dawn? What's gotten into you?" SpongeBob looked up, his eyes bright. "Just felt like the ocean was calling me to work early, sir." Mr. Krabs snorted. Well, if the sea's telling you to work, who am I to argue with her?" He chuckled, walking over to adjust the cash register, humming along to SpongeBob's soft tune without realizing it. Squidward arrived next, as dramatically as always. He dragged himself in, clutching his clarinet case and sighing so loudly it practically echoed through the kitchen. "Morning, SpongeBob! Morning, glittering universe! Morning, false sense of optimism!" SpongeBob just beamed. "Morning, Squidward! Isn't it a beautiful day?" Squidward squinted. "You mean another day of work?" "Sure, if you find existential dread beautiful." But then he paused, noticing something odd. The restaurant, the air, the light, it all seemed softer. Even the bubbling of the deep fryer had a peaceful rhythm to it. He blinked. Did someone clean the ocean or something? SpongeBob laughed. Maybe it cleaned itself. By the time the first few customers drifted in, the Krusty Krab was full of gentle chatter and warm laughter. The jellyfish from earlier hovered outside the windows, drifting in and out of the light like living lanterns. Even Plankton passed by the window once, pushing a tiny cart with his computer wife on it. He stopped, looked in, and for the first time in forever smiled. Not a sneaky, evil smile, just small, genuine. SpongeBob waved cheerfully. Plankton blinked, startled, then gave a hesitant wave back before shuffling off into the sunlight. As the hours passed, SpongeBob felt the rhythm of the day, the simple joy of flipping patties, taking orders, laughing with friends. But beneath it all, there was something different. He felt connected, not just to the people around him, but to everything, the sea, the sand, the air, even the faint hum of the ocean's current outside the window. It was like the lighthouse's light had never left. It had simply spread itself through the world, becoming part of the everyday. That was the keeper's message, he thought. Not to guard the light, but to share it. Later, as lunch hour faded, SpongeBob stepped outside for a short break. The tide had risen gently, carrying with it a soft foam that glowed faintly gold. The lighthouse was still visible on the far edge of the horizon, dark but not dead. It stood tall, its glass cracked but beautiful. A monument to something more than mystery now. Patrick joined him, holding 2 ice creams. "One for you, one for me," he said proudly, handing SpongeBob a cone that was already melting. SpongeBob smiled. "Thanks, buddy." They both sat on the curb, legs dangling, eating ice cream while the sea whispered quietly nearby. Patrick licked his cone thoughtfully. "You know, SpongeBob, that light, it never really left, huh?" SpongeBob looked toward the horizon again, the sunlight catching in his eyes. "No, Patrick, I just found a new way to shine." The camera, if this were a film, would slowly pull back now. The 2 friends sitting in front of the Krusty Krab, the ocean stretching endlessly beyond them, soft reflections glimmering across the sand. And somewhere deep beneath the waves, faint and quiet, a pulse of blue light flickered once more, not from the lighthouse, but from the heart of the sea itself. A quiet reminder. Every light once kindled lives forever. Night fell again quietly, gently, as though the ocean didn't want to disturb anyone's dreams. The moonlight poured like silver across the rooftops of Bikini Bottom, painting everything in soft shades of blue and white. The town was asleep, calm and safe. SpongeBob sat by his window, the ocean breeze flowing through his room. His pineapple home creaked softly, the sound like an old lullaby. On his desk sat a simple notebook, worn, corners curled, the pages still smelling faintly of seawater. He dipped his pencil into the inky blackness of the page and began to write. "Day 241 of adventures with Patrick," he wrote slowly, his handwriting soft and uneven. Today, the ocean woke up differently. It felt warm again, like it was smiling. He paused, gazing through the window at the sea. The horizon glowed faintly under the moon, a line of silver threading through the dark. Somewhere far beyond that shimmer stood the old lighthouse, quiet now, but still standing strong. "We found the light, and we let it go. It wasn't ours to keep, but maybe that's why it came back in another way." His pencil lingered on the paper. The room was silent except for the faint sound of Gary snoring in his shell. "I think the keeper wasn't guarding the light to keep it from us, but to teach us how to see it when it's gone." SpongeBob smiled faintly. "Patrick says he still dreams about the lighthouse. He says he sees jellyfish flying through the beam, like stars swimming in the water. Maybe the ocean dreams too." He turned to the next page and drew a small sketch, 2 figures sitting on the beach, the lighthouse glowing far in the distance. Around it, faint jellyfish drifted in spirals of light. The pencil strokes were gentle, imperfect, but full of warmth. "The light didn't vanish," he wrote beneath the drawing. "It became the sunrise." He closed the notebook softly and looked out the window again. Outside, everything shimmered faintly under the moon. He could see the outlines of jellyfish floating lazily across jellyfish fields, their tendrils glowing dimly like tiny lanterns swaying with the tide. In that moment, SpongeBob realized something simple and true. The lighthouse was never about mystery. It was about remembrance. The keeper had watched over the ocean for so long, keeping its light alive when no one else could. And now that the sea remembered its glow, his work was done. But the memory, The feeling of wonder, kindness, and curiosity would stay forever. SpongeBob got up and stepped outside. The sand felt cool beneath his square feet. The water lapped gently against the shore, glowing faintly under the moonlight. He looked up at the stars, each one a small light in an endless sea of darkness. And for just a moment, barely more than a breath, he saw something in the distance. A soft shimmer. A glow. It looked like the lighthouse, but not exactly. More like a reflection of it, rippling through the water. And standing beside it, he thought he saw a faint figure again, the keeper. Tall, calm, watching over the waves. But this time he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a smaller silhouette, one shaped just like SpongeBob. The two figures stood side by side, both gazing toward the horizon. The image faded, replaced by the soft hum of the sea. SpongeBob closed his eyes, letting the ocean's rhythm wash through him. He could feel the heartbeat of the waves, steady, alive, endless. He could feel the memory of the light deep within his chest. Not burning like fire, but glowing gentle, kind, eternal. He whispered into the night, his voice barely audible. "Thank you for showing me the way." The sea answered with a quiet sigh of foam rolling up the shore, pulling back like a heartbeat. Later, as he drifted off to sleep, his dreams were full of color and calm. He dreamed of the lighthouse again, not as it was, but as it should be. Whole, bright, surrounded by jellyfish like stars. The light swirled, reaching through the ocean, touching every home, every coral, every heart. And somewhere deep in that dream, he heard a voice, soft and distant, like a whisper through seashells. The ocean remembers every kindness, every spark. SpongeBob smiled in his sleep. The waves outside shimmered once, faintly, as if echoing the words. When morning came, Bikini Bottom would rise again the same as before, yet new in spirit. But tonight, as SpongeBob dreamed, the world was at peace. The sea glowed faintly in the dark, and in the distance the old lighthouse stood silent but proud, its reflection, glowing softly in the calm water. The keeper's work was done. The light was home. The first light of dawn touched the ocean. It began as a single golden shimmer breaking through the depths, spreading like a heartbeat. The glow rippled across the sand, climbed the coral, and brushed against every sleeping home in Bikini Bottom. Inside each window, the morning found warmth. Squidward's clarinet lay on his nightstand, and the faintest smile rested on his face, the kind that came from a dream he wouldn't remember, but would carry in his mood all day. Old Mr. Krabs stirred in his hammock, mumbling softly about treasures not made of gold. Even Plankton, asleep beside Karen's softly glowing monitor, looked peaceful for once, his plans forgotten in the quiet hum of dawn. At the edge of town, SpongeBob opened his eyes to the morning. The sun's reflection shimmered through his window, painting everything in liquid gold. The sound of gentle waves played like a song, distant but tender. He stretched, smiled, and stepped outside, still wearing his sleep hat. The sea breeze greeted him. "Morning, ocean," he said softly. The waves rolled in reply. He stood there a long time, watching the surface shimmer. The water no longer glowed with mystery, no strange beams or pulsing crystals. Just sunlight. Natural, beautiful, alive. And somehow that was even better. Patrick came wandering over the dunes, yawning loudly and dragging his pillow behind him. "Morning, SpongeBob," he said, rubbing his eyes. "I dreamed we were flying in a big light balloon made of jellyfish." SpongeBob smiled. Maybe that was the ocean saying goodbye. Patrick frowned. "Goodbye? But it's still here. SpongeBob laughed quietly. You're right, buddy. Maybe not goodbye. Maybe just good night. Patrick nodded sleepily, then plopped down on the sand. Can we have breakfast now? SpongeBob grinned. Sure thing, Patrick. As they sat together eating kelp pancakes on a blanket by the shore, the sun rose higher, scattering diamonds across the water. The ocean sparkled like it was alive, every drop carrying a tiny memory of the light that had once filled the world. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The silence was full of meaning, of warmth, of everything the lighthouse had left behind. Somewhere far away, in the distance where the water met the horizon, the old tower still stood, leaning slightly, covered in seaweed and coral. And though its beacon was gone, the sun caught the crystal shards that remained in its glass dome, scattering them into the sky like drifting stars. The camera, if this were a film, would pull back now. We'd see SpongeBob and Patrick, two small figures on an endless shoreline. The world around them bathed in soft gold and blue. The sea stretching forever calm, vast, alive. A soft voice. SpongeBob's would narrate, half awake, half dreaming. We thought the light was something far away, something we had to chase. But maybe it was here the whole time, waiting for us to notice. Maybe the keeper wasn't guarding the ocean. Maybe he was teaching us how to see it. The waves glimmer, rolling slowly over the sand. The sea doesn't forget. Every ripple, every memory, every kindness, it all becomes part of the tide. And when the world feels dark, the ocean will still glow, not because of a lighthouse, but because of everyone who ever kept the light alive. The music swells soft piano layered with distant whale calls and shimmering chimes. A slow montage follows. Jellyfish drifting peacefully through coral caverns, their tendrils catching morning light. A school of fish swimming past the old lighthouse, their scales flashing in gold. SpongeBob's notebook resting on his desk, its pages fluttering from the sea breeze. A small drawing of two friends, hand in hand, beneath a shining beam. The final image lingers, a reflection of the lighthouse on the water, glowing faintly as if the light were still there, hidden beneath the waves. And then the image fades, the glow blending into the horizon, where sunlight meets sea.